And we're going to be talking about managing identity and securing mobile and web applications with Amazon Cognito. Now, first of all, let's ask ourselves, why do we need identity in the first place? Well, from a security perspective, it's critical for protecting our sensitive data. I think that goes without saying. Securing those business-critical processes. We need to store and manage user-specific data and make sure that we can facilitate personalisation to give that really good customer experience. And have better understanding of how our users are using our mobile and our web applications, so we can have we can start to have better engagements with them. To help us achieve these business goals, we need to have elements around authentication, authorization, and also user management. From an authentication perspective, we need to provide sign-in, sign-on capabilities, as well as enabling federation with corporate and social media identities. We also need to look at protecting data and operations and providing fine-grained security to some of the services that our users are our applications are interacting with. And from a user management perspective, we need to look at how to manage user life cycles, storing and manage user profiles, and monitoring their engagement with our applications. Developing Auth infrastructure is really hard to do. There's a lot of stuff that you need to take care of. You need to develop a reliable user directory to manage these identities in the first place. You need to handle user data, passwords, while at the same time protecting privacy. You need to prioritise scaling of your infrastructure up front so you can cater for expected growth in the usage of your applications. And you need to implement things like token-based authentications, integration with multiple social identity providers, and corporate directories to support those business-to-employee business applications. Now, Amazon Cognito Identity has two main features that are going to help you support and deliver this. The first one I want to talk to you about is federated identities. Now, this has been around since the inception of the service and allows you to use third-party identity providers and SAML providers, so you can exchange the authentication requests for access credentials, so you can use AWS services directly. A newer kid on the block is Amazon Cognito user pools, which allows you to control the user sign-in and sign-up capabilities for your web and mobile applications. And it supports users up to you can support millions of users with this service. And this provides you a comprehensive set of identity use case. You can use any combination of social media, your own user pools, or corporate identities within your mobile and web applications to access any number of resources, secure your APIs, as well as synchronizing data between states for each users. We often have more than one device, so this is and that typically is something that's really hard to do. Cognito provides you with that capability. Cognito has a support for the following identity management scenarios. Business to customer through things like social identity providers, business to employee through your own SAML-compliant corporate identity store, business to business. You can extend your IoT scenarios by using Cognito as well and integrating with our IoT services, as well as being able to secure your APIs using Amazon Cognito. This is a very popular way for many organisations to extract their AWS usage of other services behind an API and keeping that integration simple. But you can also mention before with federated identities, you can always use Cognito and other social identity providers and SAML compliant providers to be able to exchange that for IAM credentials, which are managed for you. So that really simplifies that direct access to AWS services. So let's take a little bit. Let's dive deep into some of these scenarios. What I want to talk to you about today is we're going to walk through a whole range of features that are going to help you support and help you make the appropriate Auth decisions when you're building applications for AWS. The first thing we're going to talk about is we want to authenticate people on a browser or a mobile device. Now, let's imagine you've got a user table. Now, we all know pretty much at this stage that, having a user email and a password that's stored in clear text is a pretty bad idea, right? This is something that goes without saying. We can improve on this, right? We can use a hash password. But hash passwords, although they are better than a clear text password, they're going to be very vulnerable to MD5, rainbow table or dictionary attacks within our application if this table was ever to be compromised. Now, we could further improve on this scenario if we went with potentially a combination between an application salt and a per user salt, which would drastically reduce that attack surface. But what if we had a better solution? What about if we had no password at all? Cognito implements secure remote password protocol, which means we're never storing any databases, any passwords in the database at all. All we're doing is storing a verifier of that password. It means we're not transmitting any passwords across the wire either. And this makes it really, really secure and vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. And if your tables were ever to be compromised, that information would be useless to any attacker. So great. We've got some really good password policy controls, but what about encrypting data server side? What about enforcing password policies, token-based authentication, multi-factor authentication, providing support for capture integration, and being able to support millions of users? What about user flows? How do I consistently and repeatedly provide a mechanism for providing registration, verifying emails and things like secure sign-in and forget password functionality? Amazon Cognito User Pools provides facilities for all of this. We've got a comprehensive set of user APIs for you to build your own user interfaces, to enable users sign up and sign in, to manage user profile data, to implement forget password functionality, to provide token-based authentication for your applications, to provide email and phone number verification, and SMS multi-factor authentication, all out of the box. And all these user flows can be customised and extended with Lambda, and we'll go through that in a second. We've also got a comprehensive set of administrator APIs that allow you to manage your Cognito user pools, create custom user attributes, require submission of attribute data, set per application permissions for your users, create password policies, and search and manage users and also groups. To customize these flows, you can use the Lambda hooks that we have available in the Cognito. And this allows us to use Lambda functions to extend functionality like defining a custom authorization challenge or verifying the authorization response, hooking into events such as pre-authentication or post-authentication, and also extending pre-sign-up and post-confirmation events within your application that fall outside of the standard flows. And we've also got a whole templating engine that allows you to customize and localize the interaction that you have with customers around the messages that you send them via SMS or email. So you can develop all of this with the SDKs that we have available. But what we've released this month that's gone GA a couple of weeks ago is a hosted UI. So you don't have to recreate the wheel every time. This is a fully customizable user interface that ties in directly with the applications that you've configured. And you can customize the look and feel of this user interface using CSS customizations. This allows you to configure the look and feel for every application that you've got registered in Cognito specifying a customised logo, and also a look and feel that matches your brand. So that's great. So we've talked about authenticating people against your browsers or your mobile application. What about if I want to use Cognito user pools and verify my API gateways? Well, this is really easy to do with the Cognito user pool Authorizer, which is a built-in authorization functionality that allows you to simply configure in the API console or through our APIs the Cognito user pool that you want to authenticate against. Now, this supports authentication. Unfortunately, it doesn't support authorization. In order to support that, we need to create custom authorizers. Now, custom authorizers work a little bit like this. Initially, your users are going to sign up to your Cognito user pool. Sometime later, they're going to authenticate against your application, and they may be challenged for a multi-factor authentication code. Now, provided that everything works as expected and the user has been granted access, Cognito user pool is going to return a JWT token. What's a JWT token? Well, JWT token is an open industry standard for transmitting claims between various systems. And it basically is a cryptographic representation of the claims or the user attributes that are in your Cognito user pools. Things like email, first name, last name, and any custom attributes that you've also defined are embedded in this payload. You can customize on a per app basis what attributes get exposed in that JWT token. So you've got full control, depending on what your particular use case is, around what you're transmitting over the wire. So if your custom attributes for department, for example, aren't relevant to that particular use case, then you can choose not to include it. So you've got full control over that on a per application basis. And this is defined by creating what we deem scopes within your application configuration. So now that your application has the JWT token, what your application is going to do is going to take that token and pass it through the authorization header to API gateway. API gateway, in turn, is going to invoke a custom Lambda function where you specify, where you verify this token and start to generate IAM policies that stipulate what resources in your API that particular user has access to. In addition, we're going to be verifying that this header hasn't been tampered with by checking the public key associated with that Cognito user pool. The policies that get generated look a little bit like this. So you can see here that we're defining what HTTP verbs and resources this user has access to. And the important thing to remember is that you need to make sure that you stipulate every resource for that user, every resource that user needs to have access to within that policy, rather than on a per resource basis. Now, Lambda will cache this response. Sorry, API Gateway will cache this response for up to an hour. So any subsequent calls will use the cache credentials. And at that point in time, that user has then access to the respective resources in your downstream business logic processing and access to data. So in summary, using Amazon Cognito to secure your API gateways is really, really simple. If you don't need authorization logic, then simply use the Cognito user pool authorization for user authentication. Otherwise, create yourself a custom authorizer. So what about using Amazon Cognito user pools to authorize AWS APIs or within my SDKs. Well, this is where federated identities come in. As mentioned before, federated identities allows you to hook up third-party providers, identity providers, and it provides you a consistent interface to exchange those tokens for IAM credentials. And in the same way, you can configure Cognito to do the same thing. And this allows you then to use those credentials to access services like DynamoDB or S3 directly using those temporary IAM credentials. And it also means that you don't have to embed credentials within your applications or worry about the key rotation for those applications. That's all handled for you by Cognito and IAM. To get fine-grained access control, use the Cognito User Pools Groups feature. What this allows you to do is, it's fairly straightforward. You can create groups and you can then start putting users into those groups. But what further functionality you've got is you've got the ability to associate an IAM role with that particular group, and you can then use those roles that are being passed through from the token and map them directly to the Cognito federated identity to provide you with those IAM credentials. You can further customize this by configuring federated identities to look for claims within your tokens that match a particular condition, such as any custom claims that you might create, and then create bespoke roles that grant permissions to various resources within your AWS environment. So now we want to, but what about logging in with federated identities? Now, this is a new feature that we also went GA with this month. It's been in beta for a little while, but what's new here is that we've on top of having the ability to configure a SAML compliant identity provider within Amazon Cognito user pools, we now have the ability to do the same for social identity providers, specifically for Facebook, Google, and login with Amazon. And what this allows us to do is provide a single pane of glass and to be able to extend those social media or corporate identity scenarios that we talked about earlier. Once you've configured your identity providers, you can then start to look at the claims provided by those services and map them directly to Cognito user pool claims. And this, again, provides you with that single pane of glass. Cognito user pools will take care of all the transformation necessary for you to be able to interact with those services, taking away a lot of the heavy lifting that you would otherwise have to do yourself. And this is what a B2C use case might look like with this configuration. Your client authenticates against Cognito user pools. If your Cognito user pools is configured to federate with a social identity provider, it will handle the redirection, do the authentication, which then returns an identity provider token. Now, at this point in time, Cognito user pools is doing the transformation and returning a Cognito user pools JWT token that I mentioned before. And it's at that point in time, you can take that Cognito user pools, pass it off to federated identities, and then in exchange, get IAM credentials to allow you to access the AWS resources directly. Similarly, you could do the same thing with a SAML provider, such as your own corporate identity, ADFS, or any kind of identity as a service provider. The same process applies, except in this instance, Cognito User Pools is converting SAML into a JWT token provided by Cognito User Pools. A similar scenario is if you're using the API gateway directly. As I mentioned before, this is a pattern that a lot of customers are actually employing. They're using API gateway to abstract all the other services that they're using behind the scenes. From an authentication and authorization perspective, the flow is very similar. Again, I'm logging in against Cognito User Pools. I get redirected to my SAML provider. I get a SAML claim back. Cognito User Pools does a transformation, and I get a Cognito User Pools token back. And I can use that token directly against API gateway, which in turn is invoking a Lambda function or passing that off to an elastic load balancer for processing, or even doing a pass-through to your on-premises services. Now, you might be asking yourself, Steve, all this stuff looks the same. And the answer is to that this is by and large intentional, because the interaction that your applications are having with Cognito User Pools is consistent irrespective of the identity provider to which you're authenticating against. And that is hugely powerful, and it really simplifies and accelerates your development capabilities. You can use a combination of all of this, as I said before. So you can use federated identities along with having the ability to create and store and manage your own users as well as providing authentication for those providers. Right. So we're almost at the end, and we've covered a fair bit. So what about systems? How do I authenticate systems in a Cognito world or in an AWS world? Well, to the rescue, EC2 instance roles. Now, this is a prevalent, and I'm pretty sure that you're aware of the concept behind this. In fact, instance roles effectively allow you to use or be assigned credentials without having to bake in credentials into your application as well. So the same mechanisms we can use to secure our APIs, for example. We can use IAM, and associated roles to allow access to our API gateway services. And this looks a little bit like this. My policy, rather than specifying it in a custom authorizer, for example, is I can effectively specify the resources that I want to be able to create. My resource here being my API, and allowing all access to all resources for this API, except for this particular resource on the post method. So you've got full control over the access to your APIs through IAM as well. Similarly, you can apply this concept to get access to your APIs, for example, through the Elastic Container Services, as well as with Lambda. So if you have services that if you have Lambda functions that are using an API gateway, simply bind the policies required for that Lambda functions to the Lambda execution context. So, in summary, Cognito offers a huge flexibility around all your authorization and authentication scenarios. We support a wide range of scenarios, including customers, handling authentication for customers, employees, and systems. You've got a fully integrated identity provider with Cognito User Pools, and have the ability to have not only manage your own users, but also integrate with other SAML and third-party providers and expose that through a single we've now got we've also expedited accelerated your development by simplifying the need to create your own login, sign in and sign out pages by presenting you with by making a hosted UI available that's fully customizable. So don't be scared of Cognito. If you have any questions, reach out to your local solutions architect and they'll be able to help you better understand the service and configure your API services. So you don't have to do any more of this and you can do a lot more of that. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending Summit. Appreciate your attention. Thank you.